Hello, this is Aeonway, Herald of Manway and Souls fan. While usually I lurk in comment sections and upload my humble level 1 Claymore kills, today I have decided to enter the lists of boss design discourse. Let's see how this goes. So, critics of Elden Ring's boss design like to draw comparisons with Dark Souls 3. That game's boss roster, or so they say, constitutes a pinnacle of hard but fair design, besides which Elden Ring falls rather short. This, as Jermagurk has lately noted, can lead to the appearance of two warring factions, the Dark Souls 3 party and the Elden Ring party. But one good thing to come out of Democracy's recent, rather controversial discussion is his reminder that doubts about Souls boss design are nothing new. He points to a video from Matthew Matosis, criticizing Dark Souls 3 itself. Given that the combat is so simple, perhaps even shallow, why fill a game with so many fundamentally similar roll and hit bosses? If that is what Souls games are going to be about, why keep playing them instead of more traditional action games with multiple options for attack and defense, going far beyond the capabilities of a Hunter, an Ashen One, or a Tarnish? If we are to have a meaningful discussion about Soul's boss design, this is the question which we first must answer. So we know that the guiding design principle of these games is to evoke a sense of accomplishment through overcoming tremendous odds. Now, there are many ways to lengthen the player's odds: traps, ambushes, long claustrophobic corridors. But one obvious way to do it is to pit the player against what Sekiro calls an extraordinary foe. Throughout your journey across Lordran in the base game of Dark Souls, you hear tell of the knight Artorias, who, so the stories say, overcame the Abyss. So, when finally you face him in the royal wood of Ulasil, you know the odds are stacked against you. Here is the knight of legend, in the armor and the flesh. And it is as a legend that he fights, the speed and the strength, the flips, the lunges, and the spins. You may feel like you will never defeat him. He moves like a master of the battlefield. You do not. You have only your sluggish roll and whatever paltry stabs or swings you may muster from your weapon. You will feel each time that great sword comes towards you that you are overmatched. And yet, as you die, you learn. You run past those wretched shrubs and try again and again, until his strength and your weakness start to flow together, around one another as your movements synchronize. You find yourself avoiding more and more of his blows and landing more and more of your own, until at last you win. The game has done what it was designed to do: thrill you with accomplishment, your odds overcome. That at least is part of the story. It's why I think From Software started making these fights. But feeling good at the end of a fight is one thing. The real question is why the fights themselves are enjoyable, especially if so much of our time in the game is going to be given over to them. After all, in this system, isn't it the boss who gets to have a good time? They get all the cool kit, while you keep up best you can with the blandest of tools. Indeed, it seems like an inversion of traditional character action gameplay. The boss uses flashy combos to juggle you as if you were a basic mob. Where could be the fun in that? Well, let's consider a boss that Matthew Matosis happens to focus on, apparently at random: the Dancer of the Boreal Valley. This boss, he says, would have been good in isolation, but all of the bosses now feel like her. All of the bosses are like the Dancer. Now, in Shadow of the Erdtree, we have a new boss, the Divine Beast Dancing Lion. We fight this boss in the theatre where, back in the good old days, the townsfolk would come to see the lion dance. And if you ask any Souls boss aficionado to rhapsodize about their favorites, you will almost certainly hear the phrase, "It's like a dance." So, what is going on here? Well, what is going on in a typical two-way dance? We have one leading partner and one following partner, making elegant, expressive movements in tandem with one another, in a varied rhythm over a fixed beat set to music. Now that is exactly what we get in a classic Souls boss fight. The boss takes the lead with their elegant and expressive movements, the player follows, keeping step with their humbler strikes and dodges. Each boss will have a basic cadence to their attack pattern, often determined by the size of their weapon, and this sets the beat. But they will also mix up different attacks, say faster swings and slower slams, producing a varied rhythm on top of that. And all this, of course, is set to the boss's music. Because the boss is your partner and you share in their dance, the fact that your moves are not in themselves very interesting does not matter in the moment. Your moves, we might say, are transparent, flowing over and around the boss like water. So you are not just pressing circle on your controller and sending your player character for their little tumble on the screen. Rather, you are rolling with a flaming bloody trident wielded by a winged demigod who soars down from the false night sky, so that when he lands, you will be right on top of him, ready for his next move. It is this which we get from Souls bosses in particular. That feeling of dancing with a demigod is not really replicable elsewhere, even in traditional action games, for all that they do differently and better. Because so much of the effect depends upon the boss taking the lead, because the enemies drive the action and not the player character, because it is their moves which make the fight exciting. The gameplay naturally peaks in these bombastic encounters with legendary warriors and terrible beasts, where joining their dance and taking them down, as the little skeleton man that you are, is absolute exhilaration. Still, we might worry that if all the action is driven by the boss, and the player is simply left choosing the correct response from their limited range of options, the combat will remain ultimately unsatisfying. However flashy the boss's moves may look, all you do is roll at the right time over and over again until you get your chance to hit, and repeat until the 40,000 health falls to zero. If we are feeling particularly provocative, we might call this style of combat roll slop. What this worry ignores is that the boss movesets are not just flashy, but deep. Particularly now in Elden Ring, you need not only to get the timings of your rolls right, but also their direction, to pay attention to position, to navigate combo branches. You can find moves to strafe and moves to jump, and even sneak in your own attacks while the enemy is moving. Take, for instance, Godric's 5-hit combo in his first phase. What I like to do is to duck under his first two hits with a charged R2 from a heavy weapon, roll the third into an R1 which will duck the fourth, then strafe the fifth for another charged R2. This might be thought overkill, Godric being an easy boss, and more skilled players assure me that this is not the optimal approach overall. Nonetheless, I do it because I enjoy it, and because I discovered it for myself. It is my creation, sealing my mastery over this relatively modest early game boss moveset. The bosses are designed in such a way as to allow players to express creativity and skill through their restricted toolkit. If you went out to the ballet and started complaining about step slop, I think you'd sound pretty silly. If you've chosen to watch a video about Souls bosses, chances are you're mostly with me so far. So now that we've reviewed the basic principles of Souls boss design, let's turn to an issue of greater controversy within the community, namely the direction in which From Software have taken their bosses in Elden Ring and Shadow of the Erdtree. I would like to address two much criticized features of Elden Ring's boss design, starting with combos, which, it has been said, go to infinity and beyond. Of course, such talk is partly just hyperbole, but it is also, to some extent, a skill issue. Sorry, but this does lead directly on from what I was just saying about skill expression. For if you do not do the things that I was just discussing, get the hang of direction, positioning, combo branching, so on, and just reaction roll everything to survive, let alone panic roll, then it will indeed feel as if the boss's combos go on forever, and that you never get a chance to hit. And you may notice that many of the videos criticizing Elden Ring bosses showcase footage of the player doing exactly this. It may sound obnoxious, but it is in fact important to point out that poor gameplay can make a good boss look bad. The solution to this is simple. Get good. That is, try to understand these nuances through practice, reflection, experiment, and indeed the sorts of community interaction which these games were always designed to promote. I do think, however, that there is a grain of truth behind the combo talk. There does seem to have been a shift between Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring in terms of the number of moves a boss will string together in sequence. Dark Souls 3 does have its fair share of extended set-piece combos, but the bread and butter of the moveset seems to hover around the 1 to 3 attack mark, while Elden Ring feels like it pushes 4 to 6. But note that this is not simply a matter of From Software patching out your turn, because Dark Souls 3 was focused on light attacks for player offense, whereas Elden Ring strongly incentivizes the use of charged heavies at the end of combos. Your light attacks are now more situational, most useful for eking out opportunities during combos. So the bosses get more time for their elegant and expressive movement, while your damage is concentrated into sharp bursts. Moreover, if you maintain pressure and land enough of those heavy punishes, you will be rewarded with an even greater concentration of damage when you break stance. This is the new, or at this point 2-year-old, combat loop, with its own give and take of fair exchange, for the most part. How far players enjoy this way of fighting will vary, but what I want to point out is that since, as I have argued, Elden Ring is an enemy action game, where what the bosses do generates the excitement, it just makes sense for a greater proportion of the fight to be taken up by the boss's attack animations. Pulling off a demanding sequence of dodges around a majestic combo is where this combat system really sings. And when all the pent-up tension of evasion is released in those charged heavies, or better yet, the stance breaks, forcing your mighty foe to their knees, it feels so satisfying. And I think that for the overwhelming majority of bosses throughout the base game and the DLC, this balance was struck superbly. Now I would like to turn to another flashpoint of Elden Ring boss discourse: delayed attacks. I do suspect that these are intended to catch players out, much as traps in dungeons are, but it would be reductive to assume that this is all they do, and thus that they are cheap tricks which only drag a fight down, the dreaded artificial difficulty. Remember earlier that I talked about rhythmic variation? That is just what delayed attacks provide. Some say that delays detract from the rhythm, and while they may make it harder to learn initially, this is not really how rhythm works. Variation is crucial in actual dancing, in music, even in poetry. If you look at Milton, Marlowe, Shakespeare, the masters of English iambic pentameter, you will find that they very rarely write according to a strict de-dum, 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 instead improvising around that underlying beat with much cooler sounding stuff like, "Is it not passing brave to be a king, and ride in triumph through Persepolis?" So too in Elden Ring. While you can generate variation in other ways, such as interchanging between swings and slams as mentioned, if you want to focus on swings, and especially have repeating swing combos, then it helps to hold some back and hurry others forward to give a sense of space and style. This is how Midra's fight works. The varied timings add a vitality and grace that really sells us on his dance. Longer delays, meanwhile, offer opportunities for player expression. Once you understand the timings, multiple options are available to you. You can steady yourself, recover some stamina, and focus on nailing the roll. You can start moving straight away into a blind spot for a bigger punishment window. Or, as I prefer, you can first hit the wind up, then roll, and finally hit the recovery. If the timings enforced consistent rolls on reaction to movement, it would take out a layer of depth from the fight. Delayed attacks allow you to use your knowledge of the moveset in a way that suits your style and situation. So, in sum, Elden Ring is an enemy action game, loading the bosses with spectacular abilities while restricting what the player can do in response. This makes the encounters feel momentous, the victories magnificent. The combat remains engaging despite how few your options are, partly because of the challenge involved in making the most of those options, but also because of the way you flow alongside the captivating motion of the boss. The distinctive innovations in Elden Ring's bosses, such as long combos and delayed attacks, still serve these underlying design principles which have been in place since at least Artorias of the Abyss. This game's bosses are amazing, for, after all, there is nothing quite like dancing with a demigod.